Wait, new Moon Girl dropped? Oh no. So, a Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur episode was shelved because of who won the 2024 American election. I can't believe an election actually affected my life. That was a joke. I know someone won't realize it, but that was a joke. On the bright side, someone immediately leaked it to the internet for everyone to watch. You may notice that this video's background is not that episode, mostly, I think. I will see what happens in editing. Anyway, I don't know what Disney's gonna do about this, and I'm not particularly interested in getting copy struck, so enjoy these clips of episodes that aren't illegal. Now, the episode actually got me thinking about two things I believe are worth discussing. But before I get to that, I want to diverge from the crowd and give a truly unique review of the episode. It's average. It's not a horribly written dumpster fire, and it's not an 11 out of 10 masterpiece. It has good aspects, it has bad aspects, and while I'm sure there are many people to whom the episode will have deep emotional meaning to, it's ultimately an average episode of the show, which honestly isn't even an insult. I really like this show. Though, I will admit, calling it average is an odd thing for me to say, considering when you really look at it, it takes the most risk with how it tells its story and its structure. I mean, it doesn't really have Moon Girl in it, and Lunella basically plays supporting character to one of her own supporting characters. When it comes to the bad, I thought the narrative was weak. Like, it's not unentertaining, but being locked in a magic room by Karen with a magic key isn't exactly the most exciting or cohesive story the show has told. Speaking of the Karen, the literal only notable thing about her as a villain, outside of being the textbook portrayal of a Karen, is how horny Twitter got over her. Honestly, I think she's mid and carried by her hips. But I've also seen way too many people gooning over mass murderers to really judge. Also, it's pretty clear the episode is downplaying Lunella's physical capabilities and intelligence so she doesn't steal the spotlight. There's another criticism I could talk about, but I'll save that for later because that flaw is very tied into my analysis of Disney's actions. But there's also the good. I thought that despite the low stakes of not playing a single basketball game, the show does a great job of communicating the personal stakes of the matter and why it was so important to the characters that they did. And the handling of its message and theme was pretty good. I also have to give the show props for being directly about trans issues and not being afraid to say the word trans. That's very common. While I'm kinda disappointed we speed through the trials, what we did get looked entertaining, and Casey was as fantastic as she always is. It's amazingly animated, as expected. Lunella's look is great, and the music video of the episode was as good as I've come to expect. Honestly, this episode could slot right in the middle of the series and go generally under the radar. Okay, that's a lie, this would have totally been the show's version of the end of Innocence, but it's trending even harder right now because of the cowardice. But I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about the two things. First of all, trans women in women's sports. I'm sure you all have very interesting, very thought out opinions and takes on the matter that you can all discuss somewhere else. Because here's the thing, this episode isn't about that. Not really. I may have compared it to the end of Innocence and how it gets people talking online, but I think it's also worth looking at because the big thing of the episode people are talking about isn't really the point. Colorism in choosing romantic partners was an aspect of that episode, but it was really a springboard for the relationship between the girls. Noah is such a non-factor, I'm honestly impressed. Much like that, this show isn't really interested in tackling the big debate. It tells you straight up that it believes Brooklyn has a right to play in the game and makes zero attempts to address any arguments otherwise. While I'm sure many would not like how it writes the topic off, actually, what am I talking about? I know for a fact that many don't like that. I've been on Twitter. I have seen the arguments brought up about this, the biggest of which is the show doesn't address Mrs. What's-Her-Name's argument about fairness. But the funny thing is, from Mrs. What's-Her-Name's perspective, the question is actually answered because she hyper-focuses on rules, but overlooks the fact that, according to the rules, Brooklyn is allowed to compete, so someone else has already considered everything and decided that it was completely fair. If anything, she's the one who should be protesting the rules. That's one of the flaws of the episode, the one I said I'll talk about later. It's trying to simultaneously have an episode about breaking an unfair system without making the system unfair, which is why the teacher needed a magic key to make her own unfair system. It's one of those only the clearly bad person is bigoted situations. But I will get more into that even more later. What this episode is about is bigotry and the impossibility of following the rules set by someone who doesn't want you to succeed. The scene where they beat the escape room and walk out the door only to find themselves right at the beginning was great, and I thought it was even better that they didn't walk into like a different escape room with entirely different challenges. They walked right to the beginning of where they started. It's an excellent metaphor for what they were doing wrong, playing to a set of rules designed to not let them win. And when you do win, it still doesn't count. I'm reminded of No Way Out, a movie I recently watched for my film noir class where a man absolutely refused to believe his brother wasn't murdered by the black doctor operating on him, even after the doctor went above and beyond what could be reasonably expected to prove himself. Because ultimately, the man didn't want to be convinced, he wanted to hate the doctor. That's this episode. I recommend the movie, it's really good. Of course, that doesn't mean the trans women in sports thing can be swept under the rug, because people who think the villain is right to be concerned about fairness are gonna have a different take on the episode. And thus, what I will very charitably call discourse is generated. This episode is a really impactful one many trans people and even other victims of bigotry will relate to. The villain literally constructs a system to make sure they never pass the arbitrary rules they themselves set. Rules that really have nothing to do with addressing whether or not Brooklyn's participation is fair. But then there's the other thing I think is worth discussing in this episode, and that's clear when we rewind back to the fact that this episode almost became lost media. After all, this episode is practically complete. In fact, forget practically, it is complete. The only thing missing was the theme song. And the reason given for its removal was the political party that dominated the 2024 election. Brace yourself, guys. I'm about to talk about American politics. Unless you follow me on Twitter, in which case you've already seen me do it. I think this might be the biggest display of cowardice I've ever seen in my entire life from a massive media company, and I have seen some examples. Not because the Republicans are going to pass a law making it illegal for the episode to air. I mean, I'm pretty sure the First Amendment would dropkick them in the face for trying. And it's not like queer media died when Trump became president in 2016. Frankly, I think it only got stronger. Also, some people don't seem to realize this, but Donald Trump isn't actually president yet. So something about the election results itself, rather than direct action, prompted this. And what I think this really reveals is a desire to be in the majority. After all, there was no fight to get the episode to stay because no one was fighting to cancel it. And if someone in the company was, they clearly lost, seeing how complete the episode is and the fact it took an election to stop it. Disney has never been afraid to pander to progressives with far worse written things than this episode. And it's not like the election made the people who would have loved the episode any less receptive to it. They were all on Twitter saying it's a masterpiece and expressing that frankly the election makes them want to support the episode even more. And it's not like the people who disliked it would have liked it any less or any more. Plus, the show's already slated to end soon, so this is the perfect time to throw everything at the wall. And I highly doubt that they just wrote off this single episode for a tax break. No matter how I slice it, the one thing the election changed is revealing that progressive policies aren't as popular as whoever's responsible assume they are. Disney, or whatever unnamed exec or producer is responsible for this, saw that, going off the election, conservative positions are more popular than expected, or liberal ones are more unpopular, and they folded immediately. I mean, the idea a big company is pandering to a group it thinks will net them the most money isn't even a little shocking. But to see it so blatantly done is kind of the crazy part. Remember what I said about unfair systems? This episode is written so that everything is on Brooklyn's side except Mrs. Karen. I swear she has a name, I just put zero effort into learning it. The rules support Brooklyn. All the players on both teams support Brooklyn. Coach Herbeck supports Brooklyn. Mrs. Karen is the lone protester whose daughter isn't even on her side. The only reason she can do anything besides complain impotently is that she found a magic key in a random garage sale, and once she loses that, she basically loses all power and is simply removed from the narrative. It's an understandable thing for them to do in what's a children's cartoon where they have to simplify things for the audience, but I just think it's so telling because there is no risk in siding with the crowd. And so I find this episode getting shelved to be poetic, because once it seemed like the show would actually have to take a stance that isn't siding with the popular position, Disney backed down.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm reminded of Nickelodeon and Bella and the Bulldogs and its whole plotline about letting a girl play rugby or American football on the boys' team.
Because they came up against real opposition and even internal doubts among the cast before they eventually came to the conclusion that yeah, let Bella play with the Bulldogs. And when I look back at the episode, and specifically the trans sports debate, and how I've seen that flare up online, I can only come to the conclusion that Disney realized the position the episode is taking might actually get them more flack than praise from the general audience, and it was in fact actually a risk, and they said nope, pump the brakes, no way, stop right now. I shouldn't be surprised, and yet it makes me angry. It's one thing to unequivocally state one side is right. People may complain about that if they disagree with you, but there's a lot of value in having such convictions in what you believe in. But this might be the most blatant lack of it I've ever seen documented. Or who knows, maybe the episode was shelved because it conflicts with the plotline of a future episode. This is just a theory. A TV show theory. Shout out to my new patron, A. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and comment your thoughts down below. Also subscribe for more content. Thank you and good day.